everybody. My name is Alex Smith. I lead the customer success team for Microsoft's cloud for Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. If you think about what customer success means for a company like Microsoft, it's quite an evolution based on the history of Microsoft, which was traditionally a license sale business. And what we've grown into now is a company which puts the customer outcome and our partner's outcome first. One of the things I'll be talking about today is how together we can better achieve outcomes and success. Traditionally, this is very difficult when companies have to build things themselves. So I'll be talking today about how you can take advantage of the work we've done and focus on your core businesses. When I started thinking about what to present today, I started thinking about all of the FSI companies I've been working with. And I thought about what FSI 1.0 is. If you think how the industry has evolved over the last several hundred years, there's a few key patterns. First is that offers, instruments, products, and services are as mass production as any factory. It isn't a matter of being able to adapt to individual customers, but find something that works for the best, lowest common denominator across all of your customers. Feeding into that is having an exclusive relationship with your customers. Even my generation, I remember that when I set up my bank account, when I bought my first insurance, or when I met my first stockbroker, I've stayed with that company until today because my relationship was built exclusively, and it happens to be the same as my family, my parents, my brothers. And this is because there was traditionally an incredibly high cost of switching. Now, that high cost of switching could be financial, in pure dollar terms, but it could also be in change. Change has an inherent cost. So for each of us to adapt what we do in our day-to-day life, change our checkbook, our credit card, it carries a cost. And then finally, FSI 1.0 was dependent upon individuals, dependent upon humans and their own ingenuity to drive the next generation of change. I would not be able to talk about how you can take advantage of our innovation without talking about cloud. But whenever I meet a new group of people, I always want to baseline with what the cloud actually means to me. So some people say that there is no thing as the cloud. The cloud is just somebody else's computer that you borrow for a little while. And if I think about it, I like to think of it in more simple terms. To me, the cloud is like your home electricity. And this is a very obvious statement to some, but if you think about the genesis of electricity, none of us today have to worry about whether our home electricity will run or not. The centralization and optimization of power generation was a problem that was taken care of 30, 40, 50 years ago. But before that, some of the biggest power generators in all of our countries was actually the factories. And I think this is a fantastic analogy. If you think about generating power, it's a lot like running a data center. At the time, you think, no, I have very unique requirements. I need my power to be on at this time, off at this time. I have this megawatt requirement. But in reality, as power companies adapted and started to run much more efficiently, it allowed businesses to focus on their core value. Because for a company like a factory, a clothes producer, to be running a power station, it doesn't make sense because it is not core to their business. Every single time I meet a company who says, no, I must run my own data center because I have unique needs, I ask them, what are your needs? Why do you think that you have something unique? Why aren't you focusing on what's best for your customers? And that's been able to help so many companies do more with what they have. And the obvious bonus is that you're paying for what you need. You're not running 24/7, You're not paying for unused capacity. So it allows companies to focus on innovation, do more with what they have, focus their individual efforts on doing something productive. And of course, the bit that speaks to me most is that it lowers the cost for startups or for small companies to begin to innovate and to grow. Some people like to say it democratizes computing because it effectively allows everybody the same access regardless of their size. But I would be remiss to say all the positives without saying what it is not. I had a conversation yesterday lunch, with the MD of a software company. And 90% of our time was spent talking about what we couldn't fix. Because there's often the perception that cloud can be a silver bullet. It will fix all of your problems. And this couldn't be further from the truth. Because something built badly today, moved to somewhere else, will run just as badly and sometimes worse. That's why it's important for you to have a trusted partner, a trusted path to being able to run this together. Secondly, it's not the same as what we used to do. Just trying our same old architecture tricks won't work. We can build and innovate, but just redoing what we've been doing for all of IT's history doesn't get us to where we need to be. One of my favorite questions is that sometimes the chief security officer or information security officer or even a CEO will say, I'm worried about going to cloud because I lose control. I love this because it couldn't be further from the truth. In cloud, you get the ability to control more than ever through API calls to audit your inventory, through the ability to spin up and tear down resources within seconds. And probably most importantly, especially in a country like Thailand, is that it's not prohibited by the BOT, nor is it insecure in any way. We have an amazing ability now to innovate and grow together with the full support of regulators across both Thailand and wider Southeast Asia. So with that, now I'll go into a bit about AI. Almost every time I meet the CEO of any kind of financial institute, they're worried about one thing: their people. Often I'll get the question of, do we, as individuals, stay relevant in the age of AI? I like to turn this question around and say, how do we stay relevant in the age of AI? Because AI, for me, is not about replacing people, replacing individuals, or replacing any kind of job role. AI is a tool. It aligns to our principle, which is empowering every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. So when I talk about AI, I don't like to think of it as something that will replace, but I think of it as something that will augment and help individuals grow and achieve more themselves. I throw this out and people often go, okay, that sounds great, but what can I do? What does this actually mean? Give me something tangible. If we think about where AI was predicted, futurists have made several predictions over where AI can evolve in the next 33 years. What I love about this prediction is that it is wrong. Because already, AI has achieved human parity with translating languages. Almost a year and a half, 2 years ago, Microsoft researchers achieved human parity translating English to Chinese reciprocally, using a well-known set of texts which is based on newspaper. The amazing problem we have now is that the innovation is growing at a pace that we struggle to keep up with. But for many people, AI has more practical applications. It isn't about translation, it isn't about replacing surgeons. It's things as simple as helping them at home, helping them clean their house. So whenever I think of what AI can do, I think what AI can do for every Thai, every person on the planet. Sometimes we confuse AI and things like machine learning. And it's important that we clarify exactly what we mean before we go too deep. You see, for me, artificial intelligence is about cognitive capabilities. If you think what differentiates us from any kind of machine, any kind of product, it's our ability to recognize, learn, and understand. And this gives us a unique ingenuity that no other creature has. Whereas when I talk about things like machine learning is really a subset. It's a product of AI that allows computers to take that information and learn and grow themselves. But you can't separate the two, and it's always important that whenever we're thinking about what AI can achieve, we're also taking byproducts, things like machine learning, data sets, models, and growing them as well. If we think about where we are with AI now, one of the simplest and most commonly used examples is image recognition. If you think about what we use to benchmark AI, I think it's very simple. It's how long it takes a decision to be made. And the example is how long it takes a human to identify something. So if we take an example of image recognition, typically, you can make a decision under a second that this is a hot dog and this is a dog in a hot dog costume. Now, if you think 10 years ago, doing this computationally was incredibly complex. Now, with the creation and innovation of cognitive services, the ability, and this is real, by the way, it's 93% a dog, 7% a costume. With the innovation of services like facial recognition, computer vision, we can now outsource these decision points. Now, this can have fantastic applications in our everyday lives. For instance, in safety, in the ability to identify hazards in a factory. If you see somebody using a hammer or some sort of electrical tool improperly, being able to identify that and alert somebody very quickly can help save lives. If I think about now, AI has grown up to the point that it doesn't just help people outsource decision-making. It also helps all of us understand more that can be taken in, can be understood in a short period. So to explain this, if we think about an engine manufacturer, if I look into the past, typically engine telemetry, engine data, will be fed back after every flight. Somebody would look at it and go, okay, I see that this got hot, this has an out of tolerance error. Now we're in a situation where every engine has thousands of sensors, which are continually feeding back to the pilot and co-pilot in a way that allows them to make better decisions real time. Because the simple thing is that humans cannot understand such a breadth of information so quickly and find the true information from data. So outsourcing and augmenting our own ingenuity, our own creativity, with the ability to parse many, many data sets in a short time, enables us to be more efficient and be better. But what's next? Well, I've said ingenuity twice already. Today, computers don't create. They don't innovate. They iterate. The next step that I see in AI, the next step I see in all of our businesses, is when we can outsource human ingenuity to enable us to be able to be more productive in different areas. In the same way we went from running power stations at every factory to being able to focus on our core businesses. But in order to get there, data must be processed in a way that we can build understanding. One of the issues I face most when I work with banks and insurance firms is the data. Because while AI is nothing without data, it's nothing without the right data. Because if you feed a machine nonsense, it will speak nonsense. So if I think about a traditional view of data and what it used to look like, this was designed for machine consumption. It was designed for machine output. Because if you look at this, we have limited insight from what we have. Here I've created the example of a user buying something online. In this case, I purchased 3 items in December, all within a reasonably short period. And what I probably have in that same e-commerce style context is data somewhere else in a disparate table, disparate field, saying what this actually means. And yes, there may be a left join, there may be some connection between the two. But as a business user, I'm not connecting the dots. So when I think about how we build AI to be more human-centric, to be more outcome-based, I think about how to combine these two. Because we can't keep using the same data sets. These are used for commercial pieces. And if you look at this, you can clearly see if I've recently bought diapers, painkillers, and alcohol, I've probably got a newborn baby, and I need better targeting. I need something to make my life easier. Now for us, if we're creating instruments financially or otherwise, this gives us a great opportunity to be human-centric, to adapt to what people need. I'm sure you're all aware one of the first cases of big data was when a store in the US moved the beer closer to the diapers, so husbands who were getting diapers on their drive home would also pick up beer. Now, if we think about this in every single transaction, there are thousands of iterations, thousands of scenarios where this can help. So what can we use? What data could we have? When I was thinking about this, I decided to go completely away from anything financial to something that all of us can relate to, which is watching TV. Because every time I speak in an envisioning workshop or any kind of situation, I often find my customers, my partners, my friends box themselves into their industry. So I want to talk about something completely unrelated, which is watching a film. Now, if you look at this player, many of you may recognize it as a common US video company. What data do you think there is? You might look at it and go, okay, well, I can see the movie is 1 hour 57, 22 seconds long. I see subtitles, I see a URL. So what else can we take in? Well, first of all, how long we've been watching that video. Or, in any other case, the duration of our session, how long a customer has been interacting with us. Secondly, we can see whether they've moved back and forth. In a website, this might be the navigation. It might be if people get frustrated and abandon, it might be refreshing. In a real-life scenario, it might be whether somebody walks into a branch, waits 20 minutes, gets nobody saying hi, nobody offering water, and walks out. It might be when situations where people try several branches, they try ATMs with the incorrect combination of cash. But then there's other things, things which we typically don't think of. In a situation like a video player, what if the audio language is different to our own spoken language? What if you are Thai and English speaking, but you're watching something in Japanese with English subtitles? As soon as we start thinking outside of the box, we can start to understand a real customer persona, a real demographic of what they actually are, not what they say they are. One of my favorite examples here is when somebody is watching with subtitles and the volume off. If you look at your front desk today, the receptionist didn't notice I was there for about 30 seconds because she was watching a video on her phone. Now, what does this say to us as a producer, as a company, as a provider? Now we can tailor our experiences better because we adapt to what the customer needs. We adapt to what the user needs, not to what we believe. If I can identify that a customer watches video muted all the time, I can customize their needs. I can optimize them for a plan that incentivizes them during the day. And then there's things that we see and we know about, but we don't necessarily know how to use. Tracking data that's shared between platforms and shared between sites. If you think about the US's largest e-commerce website, Their ability to share data between their video platform, their banking platform, and their commerce platform gives them an ability to be incredibly insightful. As all of us trend towards super apps, as we trend towards the same thing to pay, as to get a bike to work, as to everything else, we're in a situation where that shared tracking data has incredible uses if used properly. What about facial recognition? So if you look at my small Gravatar in the corner, for anybody aware of Gravatar, it's a platform that lets you upload a photo of yourself, and when you post a comment on a blog or you use certain websites, it recognizes your email address and uses your face. This photo was when I was younger and slimmer and happier, and what I can use this for is tracking where my customers are across multiple websites, but also I can take facial recognition and understand what these photos represent. Apparently, I'm somewhere between 28 and 37, mostly male and mostly happy. And if we think about the insight that that quick decision point makes, that simple targeting of non-material information, things that I don't expect to expose to a customer or expose to a company, helps those companies tailor their decisions better for me. One of my favorite examples is recommendation engines. We have this everywhere. If it's online shopping, if it's a push notification in an app, if it's watching videos on YouTube. Where we often forget is that recommendations are fine. They're based on history. But we should be reinforcing them and understanding where they can be based on acceptance as well. To give you an example, if I watch the first video about types of bacon, and I abandon after 10 seconds, 30 seconds, it's a bad recommendation. If I buy a type of policy and I churn after my first renewal, it's a bad recommendation. Although the cycles are longer in renewals, it still gives us that information to say whether or not somebody is the right target and how we can better train our models for customer outcomes. One of my favorites as well is how we track individuals by things like IP address. So you may be familiar with the use of IP addresses to track people. Traditionally, it's not been particularly accurate. This is where my home IP address is suggested to be. For those of you not familiar with Singapore, this is a industrial park. I do not live there. But with the improvement and optimization, now that's actually surprisingly, don't take pictures of my address, please. That is surprisingly close to where I live. Now, as a consumer, I'm torn. Part of me says, this is great. I get better recommendations. Now, when I'm having lunch, or rather when I want to have lunch, I look in my application, my ads are all for food eateries near me. And then I have the fear that, oh well, this means that people are able to find out where I am. Because the Microsoft Office to my home, it's about 700 meters, so it's incredibly accurate. So this brings into question the ethics of artificial intelligence and how we play into that. And I encourage you, as you think about how you use AI in all of your businesses, always focus on the ethics and making sure you do right by the customer, because it's a very hard thing to balance. So with all those kinds of data, everything you can get from a video player or a web session or even an individual walking into a branch or a store, where do we find the meaning between all of these? So when I try to build on my FSI 1.0 picture, I start thinking about FSI 2.0. And the first is taking things that are mass-produced to things that are tailor-made. The easiest example is speaking to people. In 1996, Microsoft produced a piece of software called MS Comic Chat. It was built on IRC, a legacy chat protocol, and it allowed simple conversations to be made into comics. This technology existed 24 years ago, so you might think, where is it relevant today? When I get an email from my relationship manager at my bank, he calls me Jared, which is not my name, He tells me about investments in a stock market I don't have an account in. The lack of personalization, the lack of curation is remarkable. What if we innovate on this? What if we take mass market data and we make it into a way that people want to consume that? I love to think of things like video. Personally, I don't consume data in video, but so many of my colleagues and friends do. They prefer to watch a YouTube clip rather than read a book. So what if we take things like market data insight and we use startups like Wibbits to create curated video tailored to the individual? Now you're meeting people where they want to consume, where they want to transact. You're able to bring the experience to be more human-centric. I talked earlier about the high cost of switching from an individual's institution. Now it's become a more focus on higher retention. We don't make it difficult for people to leave. We make it difficult for them to want to leave. So I live in Singapore. Singapore is an incredibly heterogeneous society. A lot of different demographics, a lot of different people. And when I produce a product for the Singapore market, I need to think about how I can minimize the offense, how I can minimize the variance between people. Let's think of an example where you have a particular financial instrument, and you see churn. So nominal churn in instruments is about 13%. It's been holding steady, and suddenly it goes from 13 to 30. Now you look and go, okay, well, what's changed? What's different? Everything was holding steady, and I see no obvious pattern when I look at my outliers. This is where AI can help us by helping us better identify patterns where we can't process the breadth of information quick enough. So in a situation where we can then segment users, we can have better insight of those users. We can then identify patterns. We can identify groups who have similar properties. If I go back to my video example, there was an example in a company I worked at about 15 years ago, where we had 10 years ago, where we had users that kept abandoning a particular piece of content 5 minutes in. It turns out there was a particular phrase used in the TV show which upset a demographic of people. So they abandoned. They said, I don't want to consume this. If we think about this in a FSI point of view, where can we use this data? How can we change? If we know a churn is coming up, we can proactively resell. We can have relationship managers or even emails reaching out and saying, hey, we believe that we have a better offer for you. We are more human and individual-centric. If we find that many people are churning, we can use PR and other instruments to be able to compensate for that. And most importantly, we can change our business models to adapt to a changing market. We can be there to help change a company if we know the market will go that way. Leading on from the high switching cost is exclusivity. Relationships with banks, with insurers, with brokers, tended to be exclusive. As a relationship manager, I would not want my customers to go elsewhere. But now I see an increasing focus on partnerships and just-in-time offers. So if you think about how they are purely today upsell-based on a single relationship with a single individual, and then we look at what's penetrating the market, I think a great example is a company like Grab. Grab in themselves obviously are starting to play in payments, travel, hotel booking, food, many areas. But they're also aggressively partnering. They are focusing on what they do best and not what is undifferentiated. And companies like Grab are able to say, oh, well, I see this individual took a taxi to a gym. He then went to Soup Spoon. Then he went to a store and he paid using GrabPay. Building this data correlation enables far better just-in-time analytics. I think of an example I worked on in Japan about 5 years ago with a large department store. They had a failing loyalty system, and many of their customers didn't bother signing up. We used facial recognition to see where people hesitated in store. If you think about when you walk around the store and you pick something up, then your partner says, no, we don't need this. Or you think, oh, I'll get it later, or I'll buy online. The ability to take that data and say, okay, not based on what they purchase, but based on what they don't purchase, I can make better recommendations. I can help this consumer get better prices. Hey, you didn't buy this thing. It's now 10% discount. This is where we start to make things more front foot, more human-centric. And then finally, is how do we take the idea of replacing human ingenuity into augmenting human ingenuity? We don't replace people. We help them do more. We augment what they do and build on top. If we think about how a credit line, how a decision on a credit line was made, it's a very laborious process based on your history. But it's often based on your history with a single financial organization. Only in the early 90s did things like distributed credit scoring start to become popularized. And many of the data sources across these companies were even then siloed. To give an example, I applied for a credit card and I was rejected, even though I have a bank account with that company. And it turns out that their data was so siloed they were not able to make a composite decision. Now, with the ever-increasing proclivity of data, what can we do? Now we have a huge amount of conscious data, things that I do, things I buy. But we also have unconscious data. For instance, what I don't buy, how I navigate a website, how I walk out of a store after 5 minutes, or how when a Grab driver talks to me too much, I don't want to be in that car anymore. It's simple things like this that we can use in our businesses to say, this makes it better even if the customer doesn't tell us what they want. So we reduce the risk when we, for instance, use non-standard data like in credit scoring, where we use people's behavior beyond just what they necessarily provide to us. And if I combine this with some of the pieces I mentioned earlier, things like profiling, geo-targeting, we can do this everywhere from advertising, media production, even in things like risk and analysis and AML, because no longer do we have to worry about a single human or a single silo of data. We remove the guesswork from risk. And if I think about something non-core, not core banking, not core FSI at all, what about outreach? What about digital marketing? The ability to do analysis in a supermarket, in a shopping mall. Yes, we know that typically in the mornings, it'll be business people. During the day, maybe kids on break from school. Then in the evenings, it'll be business. But what if we're able to do facial recognition, do analysis of demographic and say, hey, actually we see that there's a peak at this time. It turns out the school has changed their break hours, the work has changed their break hours, so we can do better targeting. We can bring things to people and meet them on their terms. So these are my 4 pieces that I try and anchor my view of FSI 2.0, around making things tailor-made, retention instead of exclusivity, matching offers to people when they need, and doing it just in time. If I make a purchase in a store, if I get a push notification saying, go spend 500 baht more and you get a voucher, I'll do that. And being able to augment humans, not to replace humans. But every time somebody asks about AI, their first question is, will AI replace me? And the second is, how do I be safe? Microsoft and a few other companies have crafted these 6 principles of ethical AI. For me, this is something that is non-negotiable. Whether it's things like privacy and security, knowing that your data, because there is a huge amount of data, knowing it will be processed in a way that it's not improperly exposed. Transparency, making sure, for instance, if an AI model makes a decision on your credit scoring, you have transparency into how that is calculated. Accountability. Once a decision has been made, you understand why, and you can then reproduce that offer, reproduce that scenario. And I group together fairness and inclusivity. There have been so many cases of things like facial recognition improperly recognizing people. Sometimes it's a funny mistake, sometimes it's genuinely offensive. It excludes individuals. Only by following principles like this can we be fair, inclusive, accountable, and secure to make sure that our customers have the best outcomes when we use AI for them. So to close off, in summary, AI is nothing without data, but more importantly, it's nothing without the right data. Every time we make a decision based on bad data, we create bad information. But the right data isn't necessarily what's obvious. My favorite example is not what people buy, but what they don't. It's not what people do, but what they choose not to. So when you're thinking about the right data for you to gather as a business, for you to push your data controllers to start to work on, think about yourself. Think about when you walk into a store, when you walk into a branch, when you call somebody, what do you do and what do you choose not to? As we start to build on these models, as we start to change what we do, we think about a better way to serve our customers. But no matter what data you take in, no matter what you do, I implore, I beg you, to use AI for the right purpose. Use it to do things for empowering people and organizations, not to detract. Because with the increasing power of computing, the increasing power of technology, it's all of our responsibilities to be accountable, to be fair, and to be inclusive. So I beg you to always be responsible in how you use your data, but don't let you be held back by what you see. Think about things that you can do beyond that as well. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and your attention this morning. I would like you to go do great things. If you have any questions, my email address is in the bottom right. I include my Twitter handle for some reason, but don't worry about that. And I'll be around for a little while if you have anything else. Thank you very much.